Dia de Gumando Ugoranam Beruzansa.
9 years ago, I started playing my first Monster Hunter game, Monster Hunter Tri. It was, and is to this day, my favorite game of all time. I played through the main storyline 2 or 3 times, even after the online servers were shut down, where I spent hundreds of hours making friends and going on random quests just for the fun of it. Because of my excellent experience with Tri, I didn't stop there with my love of Monster Hunter games. From Tri, I moved on to Tri Ultimate, then 4 Ultimate, then Portable 3rd, then Tri Ultimate again, and finally Monster Hunter World, where I currently have around 144 hours played. What I'm getting at here is that I am no stranger to Monster Hunter, which is why today I'm giving my opinion on the formula of gameplay for Monster Hunter. From my point of view, there are 2 options. Classic, which is the formula for all Monster Hunter games leading up to 4 Ultimate, with some slight changes here and there. And World, a complete overhaul of the way the game is played, leaving behind only the most basic gameplay. I'm excluding Generations and Generations Ultimate from this list because they were more of an offshoot of the 4th generation and not a main series title, in my opinion at least. So, with that in mind, I'll give you my verdict of preference between our 2 candidates right off the bat. I prefer, drumroll please, Classic. Alright, so, I prefer Classic. This does not mean that I dislike the Monster Hunter World formula. In fact, there's a few things that I think they did very, very right, and I want to go over those first before I get into why I like the Classic system better, and also what I think the optimal Monster Hunter formula would be, because I think it's probably a mix between World and Classic. I think that there's a balance in between those 2 things that you could achieve that would make an absolutely wonderful Monster Hunter game to play. So, without any further ado, let's get into the positive sides of the World formula. So, my favorite thing that Monster Hunter World changed about the traditional formula is the combat. Now, the combat has gotten tweaks throughout the years in the main series titles before World, but it has never been overhauled so brilliantly as it has been in World. It adds a bit of flash to almost all the weapons, but not to such an extreme extent like Generations or Generations Ultimate did. It tweaks them just enough so that the weapons are much more natural and fluid to use, whereas in previous games I felt like it was a bit more static. Whenever you would choose to attack, you'd be locked in that position, and it did take a bit more skill to get used to that, but I think it's overall a positive change with how smooth they've made the combat with each individual weapon. They're also all incredibly balanced. The only thing I would change is maybe nerf the hammer's sliding attack, because that is very, very powerful. In addition to the combat differences, I can also really appreciate the quality of life improvements, and I would want to carry over almost all of them. So you have, like, being able to mine and collect bugs pretty much anywhere in the maps as you go, although the bugs would need a little bit of tweaking because of some points that I'm going to bring up later. But the mining, the mining is beautiful. It's quick. It doesn't take much out of your quest to do it. Doesn't take a lot of time. It's just lovely. Gathering items is easier than it has ever been, and that is just a straight up godsend. All of the quality of life improvements in Monster Hunter World I would keep, except for your carved items going straight to the item boxes when you're in the middle of a quest. Now, my problem with this is it's a bit unrealistic, and I know you don't play Monster Hunter for 2 things, its story or its realism, but I would appreciate it more if you had to plan for the items that you would be carving on the quest rather than just not having to worry about it because it magically vanishes to a box elsewhere in the universe. But that's just me. That point is a bit up for debate more than the others in my mind, because that's just a small thing I would tweak. But in general, quality of life improvements are lovely. Also, sliding is really nice. Now to get to the things that I really like about the classic formula and what I'd change about Monster Hunter World. I want my freaking segregated rooms back. I really do like the open world in Monster Hunter World, but it is very distinctly not Monster Hunter. The loading screens between zones was never a problem in the past. I don't notice them even now after playing over 144 hours of Monster Hunter World. I still don't notice the loading zones when I go back and play like Tri-Ultimate or something. It just isn't a big deal. It also makes each individual room a lot more special and a lot more obvious where you're going. I've gotten lost so many times in the Ancient Forest, and it's because the whole thing looks pretty identical. Same with the Wildspire Waste, less so with the Rotten Vale and the Elder's Recess, and a little bit to both sides in the Coral Highlands. But the point is, I did legitimately prefer it when it was in segregated rooms. If you want to keep it open world, I would say make the maps smaller, because as they are now, they are absolutely giant since there are no loading zones to go from place to place. They had to fill in that area with something, and thus the maps ended up being completely massive. And it's really cool to look at, not as fun to play. I have the same problem with the main hub. It just gets in the way. There's no purpose for it being that big. You have to end up running all over the place just so that they can show off the absolute beauty of the game, which it is quite beautiful, but I don't care after I'm over 100 quests in, and all I want to do is go eat a meal, and then I have to run all the way back to get an investigation. Not fun. Now, I'm getting ready to get off the subject of maps, but before I do, one last thing to mention. I wouldn't keep the maps with as much vertical height to it as they do now. I know vertical height is kind of an redundant. It's kind of redundant. But I think that the maps in Monster Hunter World go a little bit too high. And I think if you're going to have as much height in the maps as they do now, it needs to be the focus of one map. Now, this is more of an issue with the open world, but it could still be an issue with segregated rooms. So just make the maps a little bit shorter, unless that is the focus of said map. Now on to my next complaint. I want my paintballs back. Now, it doesn't have to be in the same way that paintballs were in the game originally, where you would just hit the monster with a paintball, and you always know exactly where it is until the paintball eventually wears off. That is kind of a little bit OP, but I don't really want to stick with the Scout Fly system. I would nerf them considerably. So basically now the Scout Flies don't track the monsters as much. They are more of like the highlight function of them that they currently have. So basically, like, there's a bone pile to your left. There is a very rocky looking ore pile to your right that you wouldn't normally think is an ore pile, because that happens a lot. There is a bug on the wall, stuff like that. That is what I would like the Scout Flies to be continued to use for. Also, you can keep the monster research stuff if you want to. It's just that I would like the main way to find the monster to go back to just wandering around until you find it. You can, of course, see its patterns once you hunt the monster enough, see where it usually spawns, but I want it to go back to, like, you walk around, you find the monster, and then you paintball it. In this version, I would say that the paintball, instead of always showing you exactly where it is, the longer that the paintball is on the monster, the less precise it becomes. So it might switch over to saying that the monster is somewhere between two rooms, when in reality it's in one or the other. Might start out by just saying that a monster is in a room, but not specifically where in that room. I don't know exactly how it would work yet, but basically to keep up with the paintball until it finally wears off, you would have to gather paint scraps like the paintball originally implied that you did, but you didn't actually do that. That way you sort of keep your tracking aspect to Monster Hunter, which I did like it in Monster Hunter World, but I thought it was a little bit too much. So you keep your tracking aspect, but you also have the convenience of the paintballs. I would also keep the slinger from Monster Hunter World. That's just sort of a separate thought, but the slinger was quite nice. Next, we have a more separate online. So basically in Monster Hunter World, the online was integrated very, very closely with the offline, in that they were pretty much the same thing at all times. In fact, there wasn't a way to specifically go into offline mode unless you weren't connected to the internet. My problems with this were that since the guild hub was so awful in Monster Hunter World, and don't tell me that it wasn't. It was very impressively bad. Since the guild hub was so awful, no one spent any time there, and there was very, very little communication and socialization in Monster Hunter World, which was one of my favorite parts of Monster Hunter Tri, personally at least. The chat is very unobtrusive, which kind of annoys me because people can message in the chat and you won't notice it unless you open up the chat later and you're like, oh, they said something. So one of the changes I would make is make the online more separate like it was in Monster Hunter Tri. Tri specifically, Locklack City was incredible. You had pretty much everything you could want except for the Argosy captain, but you could stick him in there. I do like the idea of investigations from Monster Hunter World, so stick an NPC there that could do that, but basically the online could be made of 3 separate rooms. You have the market district, you have the main hub where you guys all hang out and drink ale and whatever, and then you have the forge. And it's so nice when online gathering halls have a forge, because it keeps you even closer together. And it was really necessary in Monster Hunter Tri because of how much of a pain it was to get online, considering how weak internet was back then, just pretty much across the board. Especially for me, it took like a couple minutes to get into the online, so them having everything I needed there was very useful. And finally, one that I'm not extremely passionate about, but something that I do definitely stand behind, regardless of how much you guys are going to hate it. I would like them to bring back, that was an odd way to say it. I would like them to bring back swimming. Swimming is one of the things in Monster Hunter that people have just hated since it came out. Although, in reality, it wasn't that bad. It was pretty slow, and they did do the swimming quite well, but I think if you tweak it a little bit, it could fit right back in with Monster Hunter, and, again, make the weapons a little bit more fluid, pun intended, underwater. I think I would love to see a return of aquatic monsters and underwater combat and stuff like that. Also, monsters should notice you standing right there when they go to sleep, like they used to, because that doesn't happen anymore in Monster Hunter World, and it's annoying, oddly enough. Even though it was annoying when you got too close in previous Monster Hunter games and they would wake up, it's more annoying in Monster Hunter World. How they'll just lay down while you're hitting them. No. Alright, well, that's most of the points that I had to share with you. Thanks a ton for listening to my hopes and dreams regarding Monster Hunter. It's a game that I love so very much, so it means a lot to me that you guys would be willing to sit here and listen for these 15-ish minutes to all of my various thoughts that I have on the series and where they should take it from here. Anyway, thanks a ton for watching. I hope you guys all enjoyed, and I guess I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye. Also, make sure to leave comments. That would be awesome. Alright, that's all. See you later. Bye.